There we go. We're now live on YouTube.
Okay, good afternoon, everybody.
Good afternoon, Your Honor.
Good afternoon.
Let me call this case for purposes of the record. Is the court reporter with us, Mr. Villanueva?
Yes, Your Honor. It's Ana Lopez.
Okay,
She's on.
thank you. So are we streaming already?
Yes, we are, Judge.
All right. Let me just call this case to order. This is cause number CL 22-0237-H. And with permission, I hope I don't mess up the last names. This is in the matter of Patrick Iranidi.
Arandini, Judge.
Thank you. Sorry about that. Plaintiff
That's right.
versus Shahid. Is it Rashid? Defendant.
Yes.
Okay. All right. For purposes of the record, I am Judge Rogelio Valdez, presiding over this case by assignment of the Fifth Region. We have before us, in the matter of this case, the sitting judge issued a temporary restraining order, a TRO as we call it, and he issued it for 14 days and scheduled it, I believe, for February the 2nd. And he recused himself. I was assigned to hear this case. By way of a little history, I informed the regional judge that I had a conflict, I believe, on the 3rd. And so therefore I couldn't hear this case. But I know that I had the authority to extend it. But when I communicated with the court coordinator, he informed me that the parties wanted to hear it earlier and that it would require about 45 minutes of my time. So I scheduled it early this afternoon because I have a conflict after 3 o'clock. So
After what, Judge? After 3?
yes, I'm not going to go beyond 3 o'clock, maybe a little bit before, because we got some bad weather and I got a personal conflict that I need to attend. So in any event, I am an Odyssey. I pulled the record, the file from Odyssey, and it didn't have much paperwork on it other than the original application for TRO and for the injunction. You all have been very busy here the last 24 hours because I have been inundated with a lot of paperwork. And as I move forward,
I apologize, Judge.
that's okay. And as I move forward, earlier this morning, or about an hour or so ago, I got a communication from defense counsel, I guess secretary, saying that they were having a hard time filing some paperwork for respond to this litigation because it wasn't going through, I guess, through electronics to the clerk's office and or to the county court. So with that exception, because I knew that time was of the essence, I gave permission for you all to file for response reluctantly because of that situation that I guess the computers weren't working or whatever over at the courthouse. But from this time forward, I do not want anything to be filed directly to me. Please file it with the clerks of the court, and they will forward the information to me. I also will remind the parties that I have access to Odyssey, as all judges do in Hidalgo County, and so I can easily access the file to get your pleadings from in that manner. So please follow. Okay.
If I might, we filed 11 exhibits. Have they come into Odyssey yet?
No, they didn't. Just as I was about to take the bench about 20 minutes before, defense counsel filed various authorities and the like, and I have not reviewed them, you all are filing information at the last minute. And so because some of it has been filed and had not been received by the clerks, I guess, or not put on the program for us to receive it, I do not have that information, Ms. Klein. So,
Okay,
but anyway, I just wanted to stop further. First of all, to tell you that from here on out, you just follow the way you do it regularly in every case, and I'll get them. But because this was scheduled, it was up by agreement from what I understand, but we have new counsels coming on board, and obviously the litigation has expanded a little bit more, or a lot more, should I say. That being the case, I've already pronounced what case it is, that I'll be the presiding judge in this case. Now, for purposes of the record, who represents the plaintiff and who's going to be lead counsel? Because the original documentation had Mr. Juan Angel Guerra, and I don't see him.
He's here.
Oh, is he?
Yes, I'm here, Judge.
Raise your hand because you're in. I don't know what. Here we go. All right. Thank you. Okay, so who's going to be lead counsel?
Your Honor, I'm going to be lead counsel. I filed an amended pleading. It should be in your Odyssey. It was filed yesterday.
Yes, I got that amended pleading. Okay, so we got both Mr. Guerra and Ms. Klein for the plaintiffs.
Correct.
On the side of the defendants, the old plaintiffs had Mr. Garcia?
Mr. Pete Diaz.
I'm sorry. I just heard another temporary restraining order this morning that had Mr. Garcia, so I'm kind of duplicating him. Mr. Diaz was the lawyer for the plaintiffs, but now you all have substituted and you're going to be lead counsel, Mr. Konecki?
Yes, Your Honor, and I apologize again for the late filing. I was retained late afternoon yesterday, and obviously had to respond to the amended petition, Your Honor.
Sure, and we get late responses to some of these emergency relief requests that we get from on occasion, so that is not uncommon. Okay, so obviously the judge issued a temporary restraining order, and he set the show cause hearing for today. So it was scheduled for a show cause hearing, but in the interim, Mr. Konecki, you have filed a plea to the jurisdiction, which I believe takes precedent before anything else. And so I guess for purpose of the record, I would want to hear the plea to the jurisdiction first, and determine whether or not I have jurisdiction in order to determine whether to proceed or not on the show cause matter. So you do have the, I guess you have the burden to.
Yes, Your Honor.
That I don't have jurisdiction, so you go
Your
first.
Honor,
Yes, Your Honor.
for the record, we received that plea to the jurisdiction this morning, and we filed a response, which may also not be in Odyssey.
Right.
But I'll be happy to relate to the court what the basis of our response was, but we had to do a very quick response given the timing of the plea to the jurisdiction.
And let me assure you that Mr. Eddie, where are you at, Eddie?
Yes, Judge, I'm right here.
The pictures are very small in my monitor. I can't.
Can you?
Can you see?
Yes, it have to be your settings, Judge. Just drag the screen in the corner. Just drag it a little bit to the left and see if it'll enlarge it. If not,
that's okay. I mean,
yeah.
What do you mean dragging on the
Like
screen?
on the screen? Make the screen a little bit bigger, Judge. Usually.
Oh, it's. Let me see.
You have a little square on the top right, the maximized, maybe that would help.
No, it's maximized, but it
Okay.
it brings out the parties that are talking out in big.
Oh, then switch it to gallery, not to speaker.
You want gallery view?
Yes, on the right corner, Judge, there should say a little option says view.
Have our response. Is Tony checking?
On the right corner.
Yeah, there's a little option, right top corner, there's a little option that says view,
Doesn't have our response.
and then you put it in
I
gallery.
got it now. Now I can see everybody. First of all, I'm kind of half blind, you know.
The other conference.
All right. So
I'm going to move you to the next conference room.
go ahead and send the response
You're
to
going to testify.
and maybe I'll take a little break as soon as possible and before she communicates and get those documents, or we'll just wing it. But anyway, do send me those because they were not on Odyssey, Mr. Maldonado. I'm sorry, Mr. Ed.
Villanueva.
You're
Eddie, you're muted.
I'm sorry, Judge, it's because some of these pleadings were filed at 12:48 p.m. this day. So
okay.
it takes a little while for the clerks to process it and enter it into our system. But which ones were y'all talking about, Ms. Klein?
The response to the plea to the jurisdiction and also our 11 exhibits. We're moving Mr. Elernini to another room so we won't get feedback from the two computers, Judge. That's why you're seeing a little movement over there.
Okay.
Those are on the queue. Those are on Odyssey, Judge.
They
are
must
present.
have
just-
come on board.
They just no. The clerks actually just.
Well,
I resend it. I requested from the clerks any documents that were filed to be sent to Odyssey.
okay, thank you.
Oh,
All right, so let's go ahead and start our engines and start with the plea to jurisdiction.
Yes, Your Honor. Daniel Koenigke on behalf of Dr. Rashid. We hope we don't have to get into testimony and evidence today because we believe that the case law is very clear. The Texas Property Code is very clear. And when there are eviction issues regarding who is permitted to have possession of the premises, a justice of the peace court has exclusive jurisdiction. We filed, Your Honor, I know it was last minute, so you didn't get a chance to look at it, but there are multiple cases that talk about this exact point. If you would like, I can share my screen and pull up some of those real quick. These were also given to Ms. Klein. Can y'all allow me to share my screen?
Sure.
Just give me a second, okay?
Okay. While we're doing that, Your Honor, I can talk about the cases.
I just argue it, you know, I mean, I'm used to arguing, recite the cases and we'll take it from there.
So, Your Honor, the fact of the matter is that the Justice of the Peace Court has exclusive jurisdiction when two parties are fighting over who has possession, right of possession of a premises. There is case law that I have cited directly on point, the McLaughlin v. Claybert Supreme Court case, which specifically talks about injunctive relief being granted. There it was by the district court, restricting the owner's right to go forward with the eviction process. Here, as Your Honor knows, my client wasn't even able to file a eviction suit with the Justice of the Peace. His due process was restricted so much that he didn't even get to start the process. Instead, Mr. Ornini,
it would help me, although, you know, in equitable proceedings like this, normally, you know, the questions of fact are not supposed to be, I guess, obscured. We can peek at what the facts are. You're starting with the argument of jurisdiction, but you have told me nothing.
Sure.
And what the pleadings say, what was the what was the problem with with their case from the standpoint of a oral agreement, all of that. And I have not heard anything on your side to rebut what they're saying. So
Sure.
I think
So
you need to develop the fact for me a little bit, at least in argument.
yeah.
to-
So if you look at their petition, it's almost devoid of any jurisdictional facts or allegations. If you look at our plea of the jurisdiction, it's very specific on what happened here. Mr. Rashid, Dr. Rashid, has been practicing in the Valley for over 20 years. He has owned a medical office, his office in Mission, since 2007, and he has operated his medical practice out of that office. He was approached by some individuals, and because when he first moved down to the Valley, he was helped. He wanted to turn around and return the favor. So Mr. Uronini, who is a registered nurse and a nurse practitioner, needs a supervising physician to be able to practice under the nursing board regulations. And so Dr. Rashid opened up his practice to allow him to gain experience and to be his supervising physician. That supervising physician relationship started in June.
So they had a partnership agreement or what?
No partnership agreement, Your Honor. There was no legal documents executed between them. There was no lease agreement. There was no oral lease agreement. There was no rental agreement. There were no rents paid. Mr. Ironini has never paid a cent of rent, has never paid any utilities for use of the property, has never paid Dr. Rashid a penny for using his
Was he
personal
considered
property.
an employee of Mr. Rashid?
No, Your Honor, it's not an employee. It's a relationship between a supervising physician and a nurse practitioner. So he wasn't necessarily an employee. I guess that could be the closest relationship to something like that, but he wasn't. And there's no partnership agreement. There's no rental agreement. There's no lease agreement. He was doing this out of the kindness of his heart so Mr. Ironini could learn and have a supervising physician. That terminated due to a multitude of reasons that I don't think Your Honor really wants to waste his time with right now on this plea of the jurisdiction argument. But
Well, obviously, the county courts, district courts have jurisdiction. Sometimes it overlaps with the JP courts if there's an issue of who's the owner, who's the deed owner. If there's issues of, if there is a written contract, if they violated the contract, if it's a contract issue, JPs don't have jurisdiction over that. If there's an oral contract, and if it's established there's an oral contract, there might be issues on tenant rights and the like. So, there's various exceptions, I guess, to the eviction process where the courts of record have jurisdiction over JP records in eviction. This doesn't sound to me like it's a plain vanilla eviction notice. You say there was some kind of a business relationship between the parties. The other side obviously is saying that there was an oral agreement, oral lease, and that he is violating those I guess.
Yes, Your Honor. But and while there are different remedies, when you are talking about possession and who has possession, that is the justice of the peace exclusive jurisdiction. And if you look at this TRO, it's restricting his due process rights to be able to even file an eviction. It restricts him from even entering the premises. It restricts him from forcibly removing Mr. Ironini. It restricts him.
Let me stop you here. Obviously, you're citing, there hasn't been any testimony or evidence proffered by either party other than representations by the lawyers in their pleadings, period. Do you think it's necessary for me to hear some of that testimony?
Your Honor, I think if we are talking about the possession of this premises, then that is the exclusive jurisdiction.
Well, that's your argument, and I understand it, Mr. Konecki, but I'm going to hear the other side, and they're going to give me a different story as to why I do have jurisdiction, I'm sure. And the only thing I'm saying is that, do you think it would be, I guess, it would assist the court in hearing the testimony of the parties for me to determine what was the relationship, whether or not there was an oral contract or not, because it appears to me that you're arguing factual issues, and so.
Your Honor, maybe I should have been clear, and I do think at some point it would assist the court to get into some of this evidence, but there's no opposition to who is the owner of this property. They have judicially admitted that they don't own the property. There's no title dispute here. So under the case law, if there's no title dispute, the justice of the peace has exclusive jurisdiction. Now, if Your Honor would like to hear evidence, I'm more than happy to put on evidence.
I've heard also comments that they might have had a professional relationship, you know, and the like, and so you're alleging that there is no cause of action, and therefore they're not entitled to even relief, injunctive relief, because there's no cause of action, and so that's one of the elements that I'm going to have to decide if I'm to consider injunctive relief. You know, what was there a cause of action or not? And is there an irreparable damage could potentially be done if for my consideration? There's about 3 or 4 elements for the court to consider in determining whether or not to grant a temporary injunction or not. But in light of the fact that you filed plea to the jurisdiction, you can raise plea to the jurisdiction anytime. And normally the court hears that issue before, so that if I find that there's no jurisdiction at the very beginning, you know, that kills it, you know, that concludes my involvement. But it's kind of different because we're dealing with this area that that I need to, I guess, hear some testimony to determine whether or not I have jurisdiction, because
and
there
Your
are
Honor,
certain issues that the judge. Yes, go ahead.
and Your Honor, just to clarify, when we're talking about lack of jurisdiction, we're specifically talking about relation to the premises and possession of the premises. And so I agree with you that if they're bringing a cause of action for defamation, then Your Honor does have jurisdiction. But the TRO specifically restricts and determines who has possession. Dr. Rashid has been locked out of his medical office, has been restricted from seeing his medical files, has been restricted from using his own personal property because of this TRO that was entered from an individual who was permitted to use the offices, not to take control of the offices and change the locks. So when we're talking about possession, and we're talking about a TRO that restricts possession and effectively determines possession, what Dr. Rashid's position is that Your Honor does not have jurisdiction, as the JP court has exclusive jurisdiction over that issue. If Your Honor would like to hear testimony about ownership, title ownership, use, then we're more than happy to do that. But
well, you know, even the issue of possession, you know, sometimes you might be the owner, but another party could have possession of it. Possession depends on the facts to determine who has superior possession to another. You know, when you lease a premises to a tenant, you relinquish possession for the period of the rental period. So, you know, I mean, that determines some of those issues, whether it's a possession issue or not, or whether it's a contractual issue or it's another issue, companion issue, because some of these cases are not in a vacuum, you know. They might have more than one cause of action involved. And that's where I'm heading. And I might further add to you, these are unique cases. We don't have too many of these cases float to our courts. Usually it's the standard landlord and tenant case, no big deal. But it sounds to me like this is not your standard, you rent an apartment or you rent a house. This is a business kind of arrangement where something happened for him to, somehow move in, and we're trying to determine what that relationship is to determine whether or not it's a possession issue or whether it is not simply a possession issue. That's all.
And Your Honor, I'm happy to put on some evidence. I just want to make clear that when we're talking about the possession and talking about the restrictions in the TRO, that the case law, the Supreme Court, the Texas Property Code is specific that is the jurisdiction.
And I understand where you're coming from, by the way. I understand where you're coming from. So,
Your Honor, if I could just respond briefly.
Does that kind of conclude your comments on the issue of jurisdiction, Kaneki?
Unless Your Honor would like me to go through the case law, but it doesn't sound like.
No, I agree with you, by the way, on your statements as far as if it's just a possession issue. Okay. All right. So let me hear from Ms. Klein.
Yes, Your Honor, this involves the construction of an oral lease, and Mr. Konecki has failed to advise you of a couple of very important issues. Number one, the TRO only relates to Suite A of the property, not to Suite B. And this is a property, the building is divided into two halves. And Dr. Rashid has not seen a patient at that clinic in many years. As a matter of fact, when he told Mr. Aranini that he could work there for 6 months without paying rent to help him get on his feet, that he told him you can have Suite A, and Suite A was in such bad condition, he couldn't even get an occupancy permit for several months. The fire extinguishers were out of date. There were medications in there that had been expired since 2010. Dr. Rashid told my client that the building had had a realtor's lockbox on it for 6 years. It was an abandoned building. And so he was happy to have some traffic there. And Dr. Rashid agreed with Mr. Aranini that after he practiced there for 6 months, that they would enter into a commercial lease. One of the exhibits that we have e-filed refers to...
The space does not involve Dr. Rashid's...
No, it does not. He's on the other side. And part of the reason why he was unable to get started was that Dr. Rashid piled a bunch of boxes on that side. And there's a whole series of text messages saying, when can you get these boxes out? When can you move your files? When can you make the premises where I can use them? So this was a process that took from June until October, and October the 3rd was the grand opening. And after that time, everything was going along really well. And the subtext of all of this hearing is that Dr. Rashid wanted to be a politico, and that Mr. Aranini was very active in the Democratic Party. And Dr. Rashid wanted to be the Democratic Party chair. And when Norma Ramirez had to step down to run for county judge, Dr. Rashid wanted to be the interim Democratic county chair, but he had been appointed to the board by Ms. Ramirez and wasn't attending the board meetings. Nobody knew him. And so the precinct chairs unanimously appointed Mr. Aranini to be the interim Democratic county chair. Well, that angered Dr. Rashid that he didn't get to be the interim Democratic county chair. On the top of that, then he decided that since the things were looking good and there was traffic now, that he was going to do a tent with COVID testing there. He wasn't using the inside of the property as a clinic at all on Suite B. So then he tells Mr. Aranini, you can't do any toxicology tests. You can't do any COVID tests. I don't want you to compete with me. None of that was ever discussed. But you'll see a whole series of text messages where Mr. Aranini from way back is saying, please get me a lease. Please get me a lease. I want to make sure this is viable. I want to make sure I'm going to be able to afford it. I want to be able to pay you what we agree upon at the end of the 6 months. But for the 6 months, there was an oral lease that did not involve the payment of rent, but my client was providing for internet. He was getting the place cleaned up. He got it fixed up. It was in disrepair. And so,
Excuse me, Mr. Guerra.
I need to prepare a divorce decree.
Mr. Guerra, can you please mute yourself?
Mute yourself. Okay,
And so there was a lot going on. So then Dr. Rashid got upset because I think greed set in, that he saw that Mr. Aranini was developing a practice. And then he got upset because he didn't get to be the interim county chair. And then he wanted Mr. Aranini to help him and advise him in running for Democratic county chair. And Mr. Aranini told him, "You're not electable." And then he got really angry. And so what he started doing is breaking into the place at night. Mr. Aranini had covered up
Your
the
Honor,
security.
I'm going to object to Ms. Klein testimony. I'm sorry for
I'm
interrupting.
not testifying. This is my opening statement.
Excuse me.
This is my opening statement of what the evidence is going to show, that Dr. Rashid was surveilling people.
Excuse me. Let me hear his objection. I don't know what he.
I'm sorry, Your Honor.
Go ahead.
Your Honor, I am objecting to Mrs. Klein testifying. If we are going to put on evidence, then I think Your Honor should hear evidence from the witnesses that isn't double hearsay.
Okay. Well, I don't know what she'll be going to be proffering, but I agree with her. This is her opening statement, and her response. So I'll allow it to proceed. Okay.
And so what then happened is that Dr. Rashid started going in there at night. He started going into the premises that had been given to Mr. Aranini as a tenant. And he even was changed the passcodes on the surveillance cameras. Norma Ramirez happens to be a patient of Mr. Aranini. He gets a surveillance photo of Ms. Ramirez, who's in the clinic getting medical advice, and gives it to a newspaper. So he's violated HIPAA. He's surveilling patients. He's interfering with Mr. Aranini's clinic. And so this is the construction of an oral lease. It's not his files. He hadn't used that property since 2010. Otherwise, there wouldn't have been expired medications in there since 2010. And he hasn't seen a patient at that location in years and years and years. So the idea that it was an ongoing medical clinic, no, that's not the case. So the oral lease, what right did it have of him to surveil the patients, to disclose photographs that he pulls off the surveillance cameras to the newspaper, who are published on the front page? There's a photo on the front page of a newspaper of a patient, Ms. Ramirez, who is getting medical advice. And now they've even filed a pleading today saying that they have, by God, a constitutional right to slander my client, and they'll continue doing it. I'm really surprised by that. But I recently got that pleading from Mr. Koenigke that he has a constitutional right to slander my client. So we obviously have issues that go far beyond a simple possession of the premises, and especially not as it relates to payment, because we have plenty of text messages from Dr. Rashid admitting that he had 6 months to practice on Suite A before they would enter into a commercial lease. And when Dr. Rashid started all this stuff, then my client said, I'll get another supervisor. And so he got another supervisor, who is Dr. Laura Cisneros from Brownsville. So, he doesn't have any reason for Dr. Rashid to be in the premises that he has a right to. And the irreparable harm, Judge, is that it takes 90 days for him to move his Medicare and Medicaid number. You have to have premises. And for him to now have to move it will take him months. But in addition to which, there is a requirement that you notify patients 30 days in advance of moving. But Mr. Diaz sent him a letter saying, you've got 1 day to get out. Well, how in the world is it reasonable to expect a medical office to move in 1 day? It's absurd. And we've got evidence to support every single thing that I've said. And then finally, there's a waiver on the plea to the jurisdiction because the defendant filed their own request for hearing. They filed a a motion for an emergency hearing on our temporary restraining order. So once they filed a motion for an emergency hearing on our restraining order, they consented to the jurisdiction of the court. But more importantly, Mr. Koenigke has suggested that we've deprived him of due process. He was never restrained from going to the JP court, and to this moment has not filed an eviction action in the JP court. So he must know that that's not the proper remedy.
Your Honor,
Go ahead, you can respond.
the TRO specifically says taking any action and or affirmative steps to remove the plaintiff. Now, if Mrs. Klein agrees on the record that we can go file our eviction case in the Justice of the Peace Court, then that gets us a lot farther than where we are today. And then we can start that eviction process. And you know what? All the irreparable harm that she's talking about, the Supreme Court has specifically said that the adequate remedy at law is the defense in JP court. All of this stuff about Dr. Rashid being political and him being angry, that is nonsense. She is trying to muddy the waters for the legal arguments here, Your Honor. If we are talking about premises, then we're talking about possession of the premises, then the JP court has exclusive jurisdiction. Now, if Ms. Klein wants to agree on the record that we can move forward with the eviction case, then again, we can take down a lot of our objections and move forward. And as far as the First Amendment filing that I pled, yes, Your Honor, the TRO restricts his First Amendment rights. The case law is very clear. You cannot restrict his rights, even if it's a defamatory statement or what they believe is a defamatory statement. That's black letter law, Your Honor. And it's not whether I think it's defamatory or she thinks it's defamatory. That section is unconstitutional. But again, Your Honor, before we start getting into the responses about the facts, I would ask Ms. Klein if the parties are in agreement that we can move forward with the eviction.
That's not an appropriate request, Your Honor. My position is that they have waived their jurisdictional argument and they have consented to the jurisdiction of this court. And there are also damages pleaded that the JP court cannot award. So there is no basis upon which there should be more than one action. And they've consented by asking this court to hear it and consented a second time.
How about the argument? How about the argument that you all requested an emergency hearing with the court and that waives your jurisdictional objection?
Your Honor, the case law is very clear. You can't waive subject matter jurisdiction. You cannot waive subject matter jurisdiction, and you can bring it up at any time. That's cited in my plea to the jurisdiction. If Your Honor would like me to get a plethora of cases on that, I can do that. You can waive personal jurisdiction. You cannot waive subject matter jurisdiction, Your Honor. And even if you could, requesting an emergency hearing is not enough to waive personal jurisdiction.
But they've sought affirmative relief. That's the difference.
Your Honor.
All right, I've heard some arguments, and let me just say this. I have not heard enough for me to make a determination whether I have the jurisdiction this time. I'm gonna request some evidence. Okay. So Ms. Klein, you have the burden of proof to
Thank you, Your Honor.
satisfy your elements on the application for injunctive relief. So go ahead and call your first witness.
Thank you, Your Honor. It's Patrick Aronini.
Okay, Mr. Patrick Aronini, please raise your right hand. Let me swear you in as a witness. Do you solemnly swear the testimony which you're about to give in this hearing is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Yes, I do.
Thank you.
Mr. Aronini, you have heard that the court is limited on time, so I'm going to ask you to try to focus your answer to as little as possible, consistent with your need to answer the question. Would you tell the
before you start, I might just tell you this, that if I need to give you all more time, I'll carry it forward into next week. I mean, I have time,
okay.
But not today. It was represented to me that we wouldn't need more than about 45 minutes hear this this matter, and so with that understanding, I schedule it. But if you need more time, I just want to assure the parties that I want to give you a fair chance of putting your cases, both of you, by the way. Okay.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
All right, Mr. Aronini, would you please tell the court what is your profession?
I'm a registered nurse, an advanced practice nurse.
An advanced practitioner means that you're what we call a nurse practitioner?
Yes, ma'am.
All right, and would you tell the court, how long have you been an RN?
I've been a registered nurse since 1996.
27 years or something?
Correct.
Okay, and so when did you start back to school to become a nurse practitioner?
I graduated in 2017.
And when did you finish your course of study?
2017. I graduated in 2017 as a nurse practitioner.
Okay, and where did you graduate from?
Grand Canyon University, Phoenix, Arizona.
What's the name of it?
Grand Canyon University in Phoenix, Arizona.
Okay. And can you tell the court a few places that you have worked as a nurse practitioner?
I worked in a clinic on Sapphire Island with Dr. Richard Ibarra, and I worked with Dr. Nunez as a hospitalist covering different hospitals in the Valley, and I worked with Dr. Rodriguez in the GI lab.
And so how did you meet Dr. Rashid?
I got invited to meet into Dr. Rashid's office after he ran an unsuccessful election to be the mayor of McAllen sometime around June, July last year.
And what did he tell you was the reason for the meeting?
He told me that he had been informed that, I could have helped him with his race had he known me prior to that election. So he wanted to talk to me about his political plans and his future plans vis-a-vis McAllen.
And when was the unsuccessful race for mayor?
It was the first half of 2021.
And there were how many candidates in that race? Do you remember?
I believe around 4 or 5 of them.
And how did Dr. Rashid do?
He had about 600 votes in the election.
Okay. And so when you went to that meeting, what did you tell Dr. Rashid?
I told him, he told me he wanted to run again. So I advised him at that point that the best way was to get more involved in the community, be more visible while he prepared for any future runs.
Okay. And what did you suggest that he do?
Get more involved on different boards, get more board appointments, be more active, in the city of McAllen, basically providing more community service.
And what kind of doctor is he?
A management physician.
Have you referred patients to him as a pain management physician?
Yes, I have.
Okay. And so how did the discussion come up about you practicing in his abandoned building?
In one of the meetings I had with him, he asked me if I knew any nurse practitioner or a PA who would be interested in leasing that practice that he had been abandoned for a few years, and he had tried to sell it. I told him I would personally be interested in using that location.
And so how did your discussions go from that point on?
We arranged for him to make time to show me the location, and we both visited there. I liked the location, and I told him I would accept the offer. At the same time, he offered also, in addition to allowing me to practice there 6 months without rent, he also promised to provide me some support in terms of staffing and helping me register the company, helping me with billing. At that meeting, one of the people he referred me to was Mr. Pete Diaz to help me with the incorporation of the company.
Did you ever talk to Mr. Pete Diaz about incorporating your company?
Yes, I went to a meeting with him at his office on Nolana, and then he told me at that point that the best thing was for me to get a company, a lawyer that specialized in that process. So I ended up using LegalZoom.com.
And so you did incorporate the business yourself.
Correct.
All right. And so then after you looked at the location, what did you find out about the condition of the premises?
The location was abandoned. There were drugs that were expired as far back as 2009, 2010. There were boxes with patient files and records all over the unit. There were roaches, all over dead roaches in the building. The fuse boxes, some of them didn't work. The exit signs did not work. So I spent months trying to get them to move the boxes to allow me to clean up, and they insisted on having their staff do the moving.
Okay. And when did you try to get an occupancy permit?
As soon as I moved in there, I began the process trying to move the boxes and get it ready for inspection. It's a requirement in the city of Mission to get an occupancy permit and a business permit prior to opening up a business.
And where is this location, sir?
4101 South Sherry Road, Unit 101A, Mission 78572.
So is that near Military Highway?
Yes, ma'am. It's like a block from Military Highway.
And would you describe for the judge, how is the building set up?
The building is divided into Suite A and Suite B.
And what was in Suite B?
Suite B, when I moved in, had a lab. Dr. Rashid had told me that he needed one room at the back there to run his labs for his various clinics, and that was all he was going to have in the building. But that was separate from Suite A, which him and I had agreed to use.
So Suite B had a lab in one room, did you say?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And that was toward the back of the building?
It was the back of the building, but he also had some lab equipment in one other room towards the middle of Suite B. But Suite B was was on the south side of the building, and there were about 2 connecting doors between the 2 units.
And did he provide you with keys to operate the Suite A?
Yes, he did.
And do you recall when you got keys?
I got keys sometime, I believe it was in either early July, I think about early July 2021.
When did you finally get the permit that you needed from the City of Mission to say that you could begin your practice?
September the 3rd, 2021.
I'm sorry?
September 3rd, 2021.
Okay. And when did you have your grand opening?
Sometime in October.
Okay. Now, you at some point got introduced to someone named Mr. Khan.
Yes.
Who is Mr. Khan?
Mr. Khan was introduced to me by Dr. Rashid as his business office manager. I believe he's a resident in Dallas, Texas.
Okay. And so were some of your discussions with Mr. Khan as well?
Yes. Most of the operational discussions were with Mr. Khan.
And what was the agreement about how long you were going to practice there and what was going to happen thereafter?
Based on the agreement that initially Dr. Rashid and I discussed, that Mr. Khan confirmed, I was going to be allowed to practice there for 6 months before a lease would kick in. But the lease was supposed to be drawn up as soon as we had an agreement, and I never received it despite many attempts and requests by me to have a lease drawn up and sent to me.
And do you have text messages showing your request for the lease?
Correct. Multiple requests I made.
And when did the trouble start with you and Dr. Rashid?
In December, the relationship began to get sour in December, towards the end of the second week of December. But it didn't fully get blown out of, until the first week of January.
What happened in December? So you had been in there since since September 23rd, correct?
Correct.
Or is that when you actually opened the doors, was September 23rd, or did I get that wrong?
No, September 3rd was when I was officially allowed by the city of Mission to open up.
Okay, when did you actually start seeing patients there?
Soon after that.
September 3rd.
Yes, but I could only see patients who were privately paid because I could not apply for Medicare and Medicaid without being able to officially practice there. And that was contingent on passing the inspection by City of Mission. So I did not receive a Medicare number until many months after September.
Do you recall when it was that you received your Medicare number?
I believe November 2021.
Okay. So once you received your Medicare number, tell the judge just briefly, what do you have to go through to get a Medicare number?
You have to apply for Medicare. You have to show where the location of the clinic is. You have to show how we are set up. And you have to get an inspection by Medicare in order to approve that location and the operation.
Okay. So then after you after you got your Medicare number in November, then you were able to bill Medicare for Medicare and Medicaid, correct?
No, I had to you could not apply for a Medicaid license without first getting Medicare, So
Okay.
Once I got Medicare, and then I could apply and applied for Medicaid.
Did you get a Medicaid number?
I got a Medicaid number sometime in December.
Okay. So tell me then what happened with you and Dr. Rashid in the middle of December?
The deadline for filing applications to be on the ballot was the second week of December. And that's when we had that conversation. And I had advised him that I did not think realistically he could win a race to be the Democratic Party chair. And if he wanted to know my honest opinion, I didn't think it was a great idea, especially him telling me he spent over $150,000 in McAllen race and only had 600 votes. I advised him to meet with the two of the candidates who had already filed and work with them to have them reappoint him to the board after the elections, and then continue to be engaged in the city of McAllen and in community service and on different boards, since he had said it was ultimately his intention to run for mayor of McAllen. He did believe that he could beat either of any of those candidates, and I advised him that I didn't think it was feasible and the thing to do.
How did he react to that?
He sounded betrayed. He felt I let him down, and but I was giving him my honest opinion since he asked me for it, and since he had asked me to help him with various projects which I had agreed to prior to that.
Prior to this time, had he made requests to be placed in various capacities?
Yes, he had asked to be appointed to a vacant precinct chair position in McAllen. I spoke with the board and then chairlady, and he got appointed. He asked to be appointed to the executive board of the Democratic Party. I spoke on his behalf and explained how much value I thought he could bring to the Democratic Party, and he got an appointment. I assisted him in his request to locate different employees, nurse practitioners for his clinic.
And so then after he was appointed to precinct chair and the executive board, then when he wanted to run, you discouraged him from running. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. And so then what happened next?
Well, in December, while I was overseas, I got a phone call from Dr. Rashid asking me if I had any COVID tests that he could borrow, because he was unable to do procedures in his clinic because he couldn't do COVID testing. I told him where the keys to my office was, and then he sent his staff there. They borrowed 11 boxes of COVID testing kits. And then when I returned to the US, I asked him to send them back to me, and I needed them to continue working. He asked me if he could hold on to them as a backup, that he didn't need them. He had his supplies, but can he hold on to mine? And I explained to them that I needed my supplies to continue working on my COVID patients.
Okay, so he borrowed 11 boxes of your COVID tests for his patients in other clinics?
Correct.
Was he seeing any patients in Suite B?
He has never seen any patient in that building ever since I moved in there. And he hasn't seen any patients for years based on the information that I received from his office manager and everybody else who worked for him.
Objection, Your Honor.
Okay.
That calls for speculation of whether he knows and how he knows whether Dr. Rashid had ever seen patients for years.
The representative of Dr. Rashid told him that.
I'm
It's
going
an
to
admission.
then I'm going to object to hearsay, Your Honor.
I'll sustain the objection. Go ahead and continue, counsel.
All right. So then I wasn't sure what you said about getting your COVID boxes back. What happened there?
When I returned back from my trip, I asked him to send them back to me as I needed them. So he requested to see if he could hold on to them as a backup for his clinic in McAllen. And I explained to him that I needed them for my own use. So he sent his employee, Alonzo, to return them to me in Mission.
Okay. So then what was the next problem that the two of you had?
So I get to the clinic on this morning and I see his staff because he had this lab in unit 101B. So I see his staff hanging COVID testing signs on the wall and putting out signs in front of 101B. So I texted him, I called him, he did not answer. So I texted him and I said, hey, Dr. Rashid, I see Alonzo and your staff putting out COVID testing signs next door in unit 101B. And I said, does that mean you are going to be competing with me? Then he came back and said, yeah, I don't want you to do any COVID testings and any toxicology. He told me that I didn't have the right certification to do those tests. At that point, I sent him a copy, I told him I did, and I sent him a copy of my clear waiver from Medicare that allowed me to do those tests. I, in addition, emailed the CLEAR organization that is in charge of that to verify that indeed I could do those tests.
Okay, so he told you that you would be prohibited from doing toxicology or COVID testing on your own patients?
Yes, he told me I could not do that on any patients, but no, he told me I couldn't do them on any patients except those that were physically inside my clinic.
Okay, and then he told you at some point in time that you didn't have the proper certification to do it?
Correct.
And what did you find out about that?
I reconfirmed that I could. Not only could I do those COVID tests that I was doing, but the COVID testing that we were encouraged to actually set up satellite locations to do them in order to help deal with the pandemic. And I conveyed that same information to Dr. Rashid, and he sent me a confirmatory text and said, okay. But however, he said he did not want me soliciting patients from outside of the clinic. I had to limit my testings to only those that were in my clinic, and I had to wait in my clinic until his staff redirected any patients that were looking for me into my clinic.
So, for instance, if somebody drove up outside, what kind of a facility did he have to attract the patient to go to his side?
He set up a tent outside of unit 101B, and the patients would drive up because I had been advertising, including through the Hispanic Chamber of Commerce for all the period I've been there for service. I had a sign at by the roadside for COVID testing. They removed all of those signs. They removed my yet signs. And as the patients would come in, including those who would call to make appointments, they were redirected to his tent to provide COVID testing.
And were you expending your own funds on this advertising to develop this practice?
Correct.
And what else were you spending, Mr. Aranini, on developing your practice during this time?
Well, once I moved in, not only did I clean up the place, but I had all the necessary repairs done. The signage was not working. I hired a technician, Mr. Vela, that he had referred to me to do the technical wirings, to reconfigure the camera system so that only I had control of the camera system. I had my name and the clinic name on the door, and I had the signage put on outside as well.
Now tell the court, if you would please, about these cameras. Where are these cameras located?
On the units at the nurses station, along the corridors, in the front, and outside of the property.
And so you were the only one who could access the cameras during this time?
Until he changed the configuration without my knowledge.
And how did you find out that he changed the configuration so that he could surveil your premises without your knowledge?
From the media.
What did the media tell you? Or, I mean, was in what context did you find that out?
There was a newspaper article that said Dr. Rashid has sent them photographs from the clinic, and that he was alleging that even though there was a sign outside of the property that says no firearm allowed, that I had a firearm, and that I was using the place for political activities.
Okay. Had he ever talked to you before about having any political activities there?
No.
Had he ever told you he did not want a firearm in the location?
No.
Is it true that you had a firearm?
Yes, I do own one, and I do carry one.
And what is the reason that you felt the need to carry a firearm?
I've always carried a firearm.
And did you have a permit?
Yes, I do have a permit.
Okay. And so was there a time that a photograph of someone seeking medical advice was provided to the newspaper?
Yes, apparently he sent the newspaper about 5 photographs of one of my patients. The newspaper had only published one that I saw.
And how does that affect you? I think most of us know, but what's the problem with him taking photographs of your patients without your knowledge and disseminating those photos?
Objection. It calls for hearsay about how it was disseminated, who disseminated it, who took the pictures. None of that they haven't even presented the pictures, Your Honor. We don't even know what pictures. That's not the question I
asked. Sir, that's not the question I asked.
Okay, let's go ahead and continue.
What is the problem, Mr. Aranini, if somebody surveils your patients, takes photos, and disseminates those photos?
It violates the right of the patient to privacy. One, it undermines the confidence that the patient has in my ability as a practitioner to keep their care confidential. It allows their family members who may not be aware that they're seeking medical attention from me to know that fact. And therefore, it makes it impossible or more difficult for me to have patients consider putting themselves under my care.
All right. So when you found out that he was taking photographs of people in your office, what did you do?
The day before I found out, that was on January the 13th, after Mr. Diaz had given me 1 day to move out. So I texted both Dr. Rashid and Mr. Khan, and I said, while I do appreciate Mr. Rashid's opportunity for me to practice here, 10 days was grossly inadequate for me to relocate my practice. And I said I would need more time to do that. Then the following day, I saw they started putting their closed files, patient charts on the corridor of the clinic. I asked Mr. Alonso, who was Dr. Rashid's employee, what he was doing. He said Dr. Rashid had told him to put those patient files on the corridor and that I should have moved out, And I did call, so I reached out to Dr. Rashid and he did not want to take the calls. So I called the police So the police shows up and they had a conversation with his staff and with Dr. Rashid, and they explained to them that there was a proper process for eviction of a tenant, and that they did not want them to come onto that unit 101A until the matter was resolved. So then that evening, I get phone calls and text messages from Steve Taylor, one of the news reporters, talking about cameras and Dr. Rashid having photographs of the clinic. So my staff and I went ahead and used papers to cover up the cameras in the clinic so that anybody watching the clinic outside of the outside, could not see. And that was when I realized also he had also changed the configuration on the camera recorder so that I couldn't see the cameras and only he had control of them.
Okay, so you covered them.
Yes, we covered them with paper. And then the following day, we got to work, and despite what the police had told them, they had entered the unit at night and they had removed all of the papers from the cameras. Some of the accessories that we had there were missing. So we filed a second police report.
And were the police out there again?
The police came out there again. The police have been out there about 5 times since all of this started happening.
And were you doing anything to harass his staff or to bother his staff on the B side?
No, we have never, neither I nor my staff have gone to the B side for any reason whatsoever. And actually, even when they took down my outside signs and they told us we couldn't stand outside there to redirect patients, we stayed within the unit. We had a tent outside when they started, redirecting our patients. We still stayed within the unit. And we started having patients, our patients call us and send them to the back of the unit in order to avoid the breach of the peace.
And what was his staff doing to your staff and you?
Well, they were coming over to the clinic for different reasons. They will come over, they'll tell us, you shouldn't be seeing patients, you shouldn't be testing patients. And then they will call Dr. Rashid, and Dr. Rashid will text me or have Mr. Khan text me. And they will stand in front of our unit, my unit, to redirect the patients who are coming into my clinic over to their location.
And your understanding of your oral agreement with Dr. Rashid was that you were to be there rent-free until when, sir?
I was meant to be there rent-free 6 months from when I opened up the clinic. So in my text message to him, when he asked me to leave, I told him based on our agreement, I still had 2 months. However, I was initiating immediately a process of relocating my clinic, but 10 days was grossly inadequate for me to carry out that process.
And would you tell the court, please, what are you required to do as far as notification of your patients if you're going to be moving?
I have to formally send a letter to every patient who has been to my clinic and notify them that I'm moving to a particular location where they can find me for the purpose of continuity of care. I'm required to notify the regulatory authorities, Medicare, Medicaid, that I've relocated my practice, and so that they can redirect all correspondence and all activities to that location.
And are you negotiating with another location to move your practice?
Once I received the 10-day notification from Dr. Rashid and Mr. Khan, I began immediately to look for alternative locations to relocate my clinic.
And are you still working on that?
Yes, ma'am.
If you get a lease nailed down for another location, how long will it take you to move your Medicare and Medicaid numbers?
About 3 months.
And how will your patients be affected, and how will you be affected if you're not allowed by the court to extend this into an injunction to allow you to move peacefully?
It would make it impossible for me to care for my patients, many of whom have chronic debilitating conditions, some of whom I've referred to Dr. Rashid in the past for care. It will also make it impossible for me to practice. In order for me to, if I move my practice without being approved by Medicare, Medicaid, then I cannot see Medicare, Medicaid patients until that approval process is concluded.
Now, at some point in time, Dr. Rashid said something to you about leasing the premises where you're at to someone else, correct?
Yes.
What did he tell you?
He told me a day before he gave me the notice to, I believe, the notice to move out, which was approximately on January the 10th, that he had reached a good deal for him with South Texas Medical Systems, and that he will, and he hopes I will understand.
And do you know whether or not he has made arrangements for someone else to move into those premises?
I do not know, but however, he did have somebody days before that go by to look at the property.
Can you tell the court, please, why the inspection in the first instance was not successful, why you were not given a permit?
Because the property did not have proper fire inspection. The exit lights were not working. The fire district connector was not adequate. I think there were about 6 or 7 violations that had to be cured.
Okay. And all of those things you did take care of to get the place ready to be utilized, correct?
Correct.
And what did Dr. Rashid tell you about how the property, Suite A, had been used previously?
He told me he had had a previous practice there and that he had a nurse practitioner there who was lazy. So he didn't have time. He was stretched too thin between his other locations.
And how long did he tell you it had been since he had seen a patient there?
6 years. And that was also confirmed when I asked him to remove the realtor box that was at the door. And he said he did not realize that box had been there for about 6 years.
So the building had been for sale for 6 years?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Do you recall giving him any instructions about how you wanted the lease drafted?
Yes, I did tell Mr. Khan, who was responsible and assigned by Dr. Rashid, to draft the lease in the name of the clinic, South Texas Family and Urgent Care Clinic.
And so you were expecting October, November, December, January, February, March, to be there until mid to late March and then to pay rent from there on, correct?
Yes, based on the agreement that we had reached.
And had you talked about how much rent you would be paying?
We had not talked about specific amounts. There are various text messages that I exchanged between myself and Dr. Rashid and Mr. Khan, expressing my concern and asking for the lease agreement. In those text messages, I specifically said I did not want to finish setting up the clinic only to find out that the amount was unaffordable. So I made those requests moving in as early as July, getting there, and made them as far back as September, asking all the time for the lease. At various times, Mr. Khan did promise to send the lease agreement, but never did send them.
And when did you switch supervisors?
I switched supervisors at the point when Dr. Rashid and Mr. Khan, when Mr. Khan sent me a text message giving me 10 days to leave the clinic. And
that was after you received the notice giving you 1 day to relocate by Mr. Diaz?
That was after I got the notice given me by Mr. Khan to move, giving me 10 days. And then 2 days later, I got a notice from Mr. Diaz giving me 1 day to move.
Okay, and who is your supervisor?
Dr. Laura Cisneros.
Now, in the pleading that was filed by Mr. Konicki, I believe that he mentions that your supervisor is someone with a very different name. I think something like Simon Pierre Mabudu. Do you know who that is?
Yes, I have. What then happened is Dr. Cisneros is my primary supervising physician. But the Board of Nursing and the medical board allows you to have multiple supervisors. when Dr. Rashid started threatening Dr. Cisneros, he made in one day alone, he made 15 phone calls to her and then started texting her and intimidating her.
Objection to hearsay, Your Honor. He has no personal knowledge of that.
I do. I have text messages to prove that.
Excuse me. I'll allow him to proceed. Go ahead. Continue.
So I decided to approach another physician to have a secondary physician because I was worried that Dr. Cisneros was being under pressure from Dr. Rashid. And without having a supervising physician, Your Honor, I'm unable to practice by law.
All right. So you are now, what is your relationship with Simon Pierre Madubu?
So I do have at this point two supervising physicians, both Dr. Cisneros and Dr. Simon.
Okay. Your Honor, if I could screen share, I'd like to go through some of the exhibits, please.
Go ahead.
Can you tell the court, please, what this document is, exhibit number 1? Can you see it, sir?
No, it hasn't opened up.
Is it open now?
Yes.
Okay, what is that document?
This is an article by the Advanced newspaper that I believe ran some days ago.
All right, and it asserts that you sued Dr. Rashid demanding $100,000. Did you sue him demanding $100,000?
No.
And are there other items, according to these quotations, that are slanderous against you?
Yes.
All right, we're going to offer exhibit number 1, Your Honor.
Any objections?
No objection, Your Honor.
Exhibit number 1 is admitted.
I'm not in the right phone. Okay. Oh, here we go. Okay. Okay. All right, this one is turned sideways. Can you tell us what exhibit number 2 is?
This is an article by the Progress Times showing, talking about my clinic and showing myself in the clinic with all my patients.
Okay, and who else is in that photograph? I realized it didn't copy very well, but who else is in that photograph besides you?
Ms. Norma Ramirez.
And what was she there for?
For medical care.
And how did you feel about having a photograph of somebody who's there for a medical consultation be put on the front page of a newspaper?
A major violation of confidentiality and patients' rights.
And HIPAA protects patients from having their information, where they go and what they do, disseminated. Is that correct?
Correct.
And this is exhibit number 3. What is this, sir?
This is another newspaper article. I'm not sure what paper it is. This is another newspaper article, but I believe this is from the Rio Grande newspaper.
Rio Grande Guardian newspaper. And it suggests that Norma Ramirez filmed a campaign commercial inside the healthcare clinic. Did she film a commercial in there?
I believe so, yes.
And did he ever tell you that he didn't want any filming inside there?
No.
And Was that exclusively taking place, any kind of activities on Suite A?
Yes.
And was it your understanding that as the occupant of Suite A, that you were to have exclusive use and possession of Suite A?
Yes. He specifically told me he was not part of my clinic, he was not part of my business, and he didn't want to have a business relationship with me regards to the clinic.
And when was that?
At the very beginning, a part of the conversation when we met, I believe in June, sometime in June 2021.
So he was not involved in the operation of your business?
No.
Okay. With regard to what you're obligated to do, sir, as a nurse practitioner, what does the supervisor do in order for you to stay in good standing?
The supervisor has to be available to me via telephone anywhere instead of Texas for me to ask them if I had any medical questions. They will review a certain volume percentage of my documentation and charts annually, pretty much.
All right, and I'll show you exhibit number 4. Is this the business license and certificate of occupancy you talked about?
Yes.
And is Sherry Road Day and Night Clinic the trade name that you were operating?
Yes.
Your Honor, I'm going to offer 2, 3, and 4.
Any objections?
No objections, Your Honor.
Get it?
All right, we'll look at number 5. This is the other piece of information about opening the clinic, correct, sir?
This is the same, so the occupancy.
Okay,
business plan.
let me go to 6. Okay, so can you tell us what exhibit number 6 is?
Exhibit number 6 is after Dr. Rashid had given me, I believe, at some point, him and I agreed to sit down, and I asked him to sit down and talk about all these issues and difficulties we were having. So he gave me an appointment. So I went to his clinic, and I was told he was too busy. And then I get a text message from him, and that text link where some of his staff was himself, and I believe Mr. Khan, his office manager Ruth, and Alonzo. And he was in that text. He was telling me what limitations, what I could do, what I was not allowed to do, who I was allowed to have in my clinic, and what the process was going to be moving forward.
And so with regard to exhibit number 6, it says that you couldn't solicit or advertise regarding any other services without his prior approval that included infusions and similar services, especially COVID testing and toxicology, which would be done only by his lab. Did you read that to mean that he was telling you if you had a sick patient come in the door, that you couldn't even test them for drugs or COVID?
Yes.
And what was your response to being told that you couldn't practice medicine in a way that you're obligated to do?
That was the reason why I needed to meet with him to clarify those things face to face, but he wouldn't have a meeting.
And he said he would not have any further discussion on the issue, correct?
Correct.
And then he said none of your employees could have keys to the property?
Correct.
And that you needed to identify your employees and give him background checks on your employees?
Correct.
And that your employees could not be in the clinic unless he cleared them?
Correct.
How did you feel that that was going to affect your ability to practice?
He was practically trying to make it impossible for my business to exist.
And he says, no other signs or advertisements will be placed at the clinic without our approval?
Yes,
was he
at that
preventing you from advertising?
Yes, at that point, his staff had physically removed all my signs that were outside of in the parking lot and the vicinity of the clinic.
And did you recognize here where it says we don't want any future misunderstandings, since this premise has never been leased to you. Was that the first time you heard that?
Correct.
Okay. And did you already have another supervising physician, or did you get it after that?
I got it after that.
And he said any signs placed without his approval would be removed without notice.
Correct.
Were you paying for those signs?
I made them, yes, I paid for them.
Okay. And he says, just to be very clear, I'm only helping you and not to have you as my competitor or adversary. At that point in time, was that the first time that you had ever heard anything about his being concerned about his pocketbook and not wanting you to do the testing that might take away business from him?
Correct.
Was his office doing any COVID testing prior to your starting that business?
Not at that location, no. His office was doing COVID testing at his Nolan locations and I believe Harlingen locations.
But not there.
But not there, no. There was no COVID testing or any activity other than his lab prior to the first week of January 2022.
And what had you done in preparation for beginning your work there?
I had people block walk the area. I had materials made and passed out to different apartments, different businesses in that area. I had an online marketing operation for the clinic.
And were you starting to get steady traffic?
Yes.
Okay, I'll move to offer number 6.
No objection.
Admitted.
Exhibit number 7 is the Texas Administrative Code provisions about medical records, sir. And can you tell us what B1 says?
It explains basically my requirements to notify patients when I relocate.
And you recognize that you are not a physician as people understand a physician to be, correct?
Correct.
But are you obligated to provide the same notice to your patients in your clinic?
Yes, I do have the same requirements as a physician.
Exhibit number 8. Can you tell us what exhibit number 8 is?
Exhibit number 8 has to do with text messages that were exchanged between Dr. Rashid and myself during one of the events that the Democratic Party had. And he wanted his advertisement placed in a particular location, in a particular way to give him more visibility.
And what did you tell him?
I told him that, what I had sent him was the unfinished product, but that it was still being worked on.
Okay, and what did he tell you he wanted?
He told me how he wanted the advertisement to be placed and named.
And is this the advertisement that we're talking about?
Yes.
And what was the purpose of that flyer?
It was a fundraising event by the Democratic Party.
And the date of this text message was what, sir?
Was November the 2nd, 2021.
Okay, and so you changed it to say, elect Dr. Rashid Hidalgo County Democratic Party Chair 2022, correct?
Yes, that was how he wanted it to be.
And what did he tell you on November 2nd?
He thanked me. He said I was awesome. And he says, you know how to get the job done.
And then what did he say the next day?
The next day, I believe we had the event, and he did not like the way he was introduced at the event. So he sent me that text.
Because he was a board member, a precinct chair and vice chair, and he thought he wasn't given enough attention?
Objection. Your Honor, in the interest of time, I don't see the relevance of this text message. It has nothing to do with the premises or the eviction. In the interest of time, can we move on so I have an opportunity to cross the witness?
Well, I think it has a lot to do with what his motivation was.
I'll allow it to continue. Overruled.
Okay, so on November the 5th, what were you talking about meeting?
He had asked to be appointed to the executive board of the Democratic Party. So the board typically would meet every 2 weeks.
Okay, and so that's what that was about.
That also had to do with, I think, when I had one of the Democratic Party candidates wanted to have a meeting with him.
Okay. And this date, November 15th, what did you tell him?
That was when I finally got my Medicare number. So I notified him that I had finally gotten my Medicare number.
And what did he say?
He congratulated me.
And what was this photo of?
This was a meeting of the Democratic Party board.
Okay. And then on December the 3rd, what was your message to him about?
I was referring a patient to him with 3 herniated discs, and I was attempting to get hold of his office manager and wasn't successful.
Okay. And is that a copy of the MRI report that you sent to? Okay. I'll offer exhibit number 8.
Your Honor, we're going to object. That includes numerous text messages, pictures, medical records that I have not had the opportunity to review yet. This is the first time I've seen it with counsel scrolling down. If she would provide the full document for review, then I can better respond. But as of right now, I'd object to relevance, authenticity, and just whatever it contains, since I'm subject to her scrolling down.
I'll put a hold on it.
They were Easter.
Until it's his turn to tender it to him to review, and then I'll pick it up again. I will not rule this time. Okay.
All right, let's look at exhibit number 9. You asked Dr. Rashid if he was doing CPR COVID tests, correct?
Okay, that was misspelled. That was supposed to be PCR. I asked him in December 10th if he was doing PCR COVID tests, because I was doing the PCR rapid antigen tests, and I was getting requests for PCR COVID testing. So I asked him if he was at the Nolana clinic doing the PCR COVID testing. He said no, he had not found a qualified person yet. He had also in the past asked me to help him with finding employees to help him to do those PCR tests.
Okay. And then on December 20th, did you refer another patient to him?
Yes, I did.
And at that time was when you said that you were overseas, correct?
Correct.
And he accepted that referral and told you to be safe and enjoy.
Correct.
And then there was another, this is a conversation with him, December 29th. What is this about?
December 29th was when he wanted me to help him secure COVID testings. He called me, I was overseas, he called me, he said, he couldn't function in his clinic because he couldn't test patients for COVID. And he wanted to know if I could lend him some of my supplies, if I had any. I told him I had some in the office. Then he also asked if I could help him place an order with McKesson, and that he didn't know what his staff had done with his account. His McKesson account was not operable. So he then gave me the information for the local McKesson agent and asked if I could call him and place an order. I did call, and I left him the agent left him a voicemail.
The redacted thing behind the word Troy, that's the man's personal phone number, correct?
Correct.
Okay, and so then he told you that he picked up 11 boxes, each with 25 tests, correct?
Correct. Those are my boxes that I had lent him.
Okay. And then he said, we're holding on to your tests. If we don't, I don't know what, we will bring those back. I guess if we don't use them, thank you for helping me. And then this gets us up to December 31 and January 1. And on January 1, when you told him you got back to Houston and you're heading to the Valley, what did he tell you?
He told me, awesome, welcome back, brother.
Welcome back, brother. And then on January the 3rd was when things blew up with regard to the COVID-19 testing, correct?
Correct.
And what did you tell him?
I sent him a text and I told him I saw one of his employees, Alonzo, hanging COVID-19 testing outside of 101B. I reminded him that I also did the same testings, and I said we will be competing with the same business, ? And I spoke to Alonzo, and Alonzo told me to contact him because he had instructed them to hang the signs up.
And what did he tell you?
He told me that I did not have the right CLEAR certification in order to do those tests, and that he had invested heavily in the testing, and that we're not in any competition, that without CLEAR certification, none of the COVID testings could be done, and that he was providing other services at that location moving forward that could not be shut down. And then he told me if I needed any help with testing to let him know, as without CLEAR, it would be a problem for me.
And actually, what did you respond to that?
I told him I did have a CLEAR waiver. I did have a CLEAR waiver certificate, and that entitled me to do the COVID testing that I was doing. At that point, I had contacted CLEAR, the organization, to verify that indeed the CLEAR waiver that I had enabled me to do those testings. And then he responded that was fine.
When you told him you had CLEAR, he said it's all fine.
Yes, he said that's fine then.
And did you actually go further to show him the CLEAR information that you had obtained?
Yes, I texted him the information.
Okay. And he just said, can I call you later? And then you said on January 5, what did you tell him?
I could see things were escalating, so I offered to have a meeting with him.
And so then he told you stop by during the day, did you?
I did, and I was told he was too busy to see me.
Okay, so then on January the 5th, he told you what?
He says to me, don't solicit my patients. We have been doing this lab business and we have invested in it. I'm giving you this space to see patients, not to disrupt my business. For the last 1 week, I have advertised and spent money, so please cooperate. We will direct your patients to your office. Please understand.
Were you disrupting his lab people from doing their work?
No.
And then he said his staff was getting very agitated, and you asked, could you go by?
Correct.
And you kept trying to set up a meeting. And then by January the 11th, well,
yes.
He didn't respond at that point, correct?
No, he did not. This was after I went to the office to attempt to see him based on our conversation. So I texted him, and then I got a response from somebody who was probably his nurse and said that he was in surgery. I said, well, to let him know that I had, called him to please call me.
Okay, and then on January 11th, what did you do?
I sent him a text message thanking him for having been my supervisor, and then I had decided to seek and find, and I found another supervisor effective immediately, and I thought it was in the best interest of both of us.
And what did he say?
He said he was glad and he wished me good luck. And at that point, he told me that I must have been told that he was contracting out the facility to South Texas system, and he hoped and he got an awesome deal.
So then on the 12th, what did you tell him?
On the 12th, I got a text message. A text message from his manager, Mr. Khan, telling me that I had 10 days, to move out of the clinic. So I texted him and I told him I had received that message from Mr. Khan giving me 10 days to move out of the clinic, but that the 10 days was inadequate, especially given the notices that I have to provide to different parties. And I said for my text exchanges with him, when I moved here, I should still have about 2 months, and I appreciate your help. While I appreciate his help, I needed adequate time to relocate.
Okay. And we'll go to Exhibit 10. And what are these conversations?
This was at the beginning, at the very beginning, when we first met.
That you were meeting to discuss his political plan.
Correct.
And is this the certificate where he was appointed precinct chair in July 10th, 2021?
Correct.
And then he was appointed, I think that's the same. And he told you he was grateful.
Correct.
And then there was a discussion about some training for candidates, correct?
Yes.
And this October 1, what is this, sir?
October 12th, this was a note. I notified him, I believe, on October 1st that the grand opening for the clinic, the formal opening for the clinic, had been scheduled for October the 12th, and he congratulated me.
This is a message from August the 14th. What was going on at that time?
I was sharing with him some of the frustrations I was having with the process of opening up the clinic, not being able to move out the empty boxes that were littering the whole clinic, and then having, and they're not allowing me to move those boxes. So I was sharing that frustration with him. And I told him I would have to suspend all plans until the building was tidied and his documents were secured. And I also told him there was a lockbox at the front of that building that belongs to some realtor that needed to be removed.
And he said, let me check.
Correct.
He never said he wanted to keep his stuff on your side, did he?
No.
Okay. And then August 26th was when you mentioned the fire inspection.
Correct.
And he said he would have his man there so that it could take place, correct?
Correct.
And then on August 31, what did you tell him had happened?
August 31 was when the city did the inspection of the property, and it failed based, I believe, about 6 different reasons.
Okay. And you asked for permission to go ahead and do the repairs and move the boxes.
Correct. I asked for permission to do the repairs, store away his boxes, because that was one of the requirements. He had boxes that were stored in an area with a fuse box. And then I also reminded him that I could not actively begin to practice without a business permit.
And 11 is what, sir?
11 was when I was asking him again to allow me to move the boxes that were littering the whole place, because I couldn't move forward, but they wouldn't give me permission to do that.
And you asked here on July 26th if you could move the boxes, and he said he would do it, correct?
This is Mr. Khan. This is Mr. Khan. Mr. Khan told me we will move the boxes after 5 p.m., which Alonzo is coordinating. Alonzo is one of the managers.
And you asked about getting supplies for COVID and drug testing, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And this is more about moving the stuff out of there, I believe.
Correct.
And then you said, let me know if they move the boxes so I can send in cleaners.
Correct.
And that was before the inspection failed, correct?
Correct.
And then July 27th. Can you tell us about this message?
It was a message I sent to Dr. Rashid, basically telling him that I needed a formal conversation on the mission clinic. I told him I was how grateful I was at the opportunity to have a clinic of my own, but I needed to fully understand what other support I could expect beyond the 6 months of free rent, based on what Mr. Khan and I had also reconfirmed. I told him I did not want any assumptions, and I didn't want to get further in and discover that I could not afford the rent after the clinic was fully open.
And you told him about things that you were paying for, software, cable, phone, internet, and things of that nature, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And you said, I need to know, for example, how much the rent would be after the initial 6 months,
Correct.
correct?
Correct.
Did he ever deny that there was going to be rent after 6 months?
No.
To your knowledge, even today, has there ever been any expression by him in any of his text messages that you were not supposed to be in there 6 months rent free?
No.
Okay. And then he told you, don't take on your own to remove anything. We're short employees. And as soon as Alonso returns, then hopefully we'll remove it, correct?
Objection, Your Honor. She's just leading the witness at this point, reading the text messages.
Don't lead your witness. Go ahead and rephrase it.
Okay. So then Zafar, who is Zafar?
The first, Mr. Khan, that's his office, his manager, who's out of Dallas.
Okay. In this message, what did you tell Zafar?
I was explaining to them that it was very frustrating. I could not get the clinic organized, and I was going to be stopping the process if I couldn't get it organized based on our agreements.
And what did he say?
He told me, please do not remove by myself, that these were very important files, and the files will hinder their work. They must not hinder my work. And there's a whole front room, exam room for me to see my patient and operate. And that Alonso was going to come the following week and he will arrange.
And what did you tell him?
I told him I did not feel comfortable having staff, patients, etc., with chats and documents all over the place. These were patient chats. These were patient chats that were supposed to be confidential documentations and shouldn't be left lying, around in the clinic with patients of mine who potentially could have access to them.
And so then what did he tell you?
He told me that their files were very important and they will have to move them themselves, and that Dr. Rashid was going to get them moved that day.
Okay. And then what is this in the end of August? You asked about the real estate agent, correct?
I asked him about the real estate agent that had been told to sell a property and the box that was hanging on the door.
And on September 16, what is this conversation about?
This is what I asked again for the lease agreement. And I reminded Mr. Khan that the lease agreement had to be in the name of my company and the address. And he asked me my full name.
Okay. And then you asked him something about the rent, correct?
Yes, I asked him to re-clarify when my 6 month was going to be over.
And ask for the lease.
Correct. And I asked him for the lease, and I said to him, please send me the lease as soon as possible so I can make sure it's viable.
And he said, okay.
He said, okay, Patrick.
He didn't deny that you had 6 months of free rent, correct?
No.
Okay. And then there was some dispute about internet communication. What is that?
I had my set of phone service, my own services on, and they had their own services for 101B. But those services were located in the same area. So at some point, something went wrong. It looked like while they were fixing my services, theirs may have gotten disconnected. So they were demanding that I call Spectrum to restore their service.
Okay. And the last exhibit that we filed is number 12. And what is number 12?
Number 12 is what happened after they gave me the notice. Basically, Dr. Rashid sent his employees to change the name on the door of the clinic.
So did he literally take your name off the door of the clinic?
Yes.
So that your patients would not be able to find you?
Correct.
And is that the way that it looks today?
Yes.
I'll pass the witness.
Let me just say this, time for me, got about 9 minutes to go. I think it's a good time to break.
Can we resume Monday, Judge?
anticipating that it's gonna after your early please. Let me finish.
I'm sorry, you froze for a
Trying to-
second. I didn't realize you were
guess-
speaking. I apologize.
I've asked Mr. Villanueva that if there's any court reporter and for us to continue on Monday and Tuesday. So Mr. Villanueva, what do you got to report? You're mute.
I always forget that. So at this point, I haven't found somebody, but I'm gonna actively search for someone.
Okay.
Our court does have we do have civil in the morning, and we do have a trial going in the afternoon.
Okay.
So what I was gonna do was I was gonna try to find someone that would volunteer their time from another court.
Yeah.
I don't know. Did you all want to do the morning or the afternoon?
I can start at 9 o'clock in the morning.
Okay, just so everybody's on board on the times.
I mean, you know.
Yes, and Judge, I need to tell you that my son is getting married in North Carolina, and I'm leaving Tuesday morning at 6:30. So I realize that's a problem, but kids don't get married very often.
Okay. We'll pick it up at 9 o'clock. Hopefully you'll get a court reporter for us and
Yes, Judge.
make arrangements, okay?
Mr. Villanueva, will it be the same link or will we get a new link?
We'll get a new link. I'm gonna create a new link, so I'll
Okay.
send it all out to everybody.
Make sure that you send the notice to everybody,
Yes, Your Honor.
the link, okay?
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Great,
Obviously,
Judge.
we
Thank you,
didn't
Your Honor.
know, I didn't know the case. I didn't know who was on first, second, or third for that matter. But we're starting, so let's
Thank you,
hope,
Judge.
hopefully we'll see you at 9 o'clock sharp Monday. Thank you.
Thank you, Your
Bye-bye.
Honor. Have a good weekend.